Okay. I'll get rid of the navigator. So like I was saying, last week was a conversation about Srila Prabhupada and his journey through to the United States as a hero's journey. A journey that has been talked about in many mythological stories. It's a journey of somebody who lives in a particular society, yet feels like they don't quite belong in that society. And they're introduced to somebody who gives them both empowerment and a challenge. And then, which is Bhaktisanta Maharaj. And then they're given some friends and mentors and allies. And we talked about, in a material sense, Sumati Murarji, who owned the ship, Scandia Shipping Company. And we talked about Sri Rupa Goswami also empowering Srila Prabhupada. We talked about the concept of getting something called a talisman, which is, in the Lord of the Rings, it's a ring. In Star Wars, it's a lightsaber. And Srila Prabhupada is the holy name in Srimad Bhagavatam. And then we talked about how there's an ordeal, a life-threatening ordeal in these heroic stories, like Frodo having to go to Mount Doom, and equivalent stuff in Star Wars. And for Srila Prabhupada, there was coming to the United States at an elderly age on a ship of approximately 1 month journey through a difficult situation. And that hero, through the help of these allies and mentors, finds something within themselves that has them, all their training comes to bear. They succeed in a grand way. And then they come back and share that with the rest of society and make the society a better place. So I'm simplifying. You can, if you have interest in it, you can see it on YouTube, our ISKCON Portland channel. Today is, I would say, in more Shastric depth, like much, much more. So it's going to require that we kind of have our, thinking caps on. And if you can't see from where you're at, I suggest you sit, more towards where you can see that. Because there will be verses in here that most of us won't know off the top of our head. Okay? So, let's see. Okay. So, Srila Prabhupada, mercy incarnate. So, let's go to Navigator. So, I'm hoping to explain the value of a sadhu in our lives. So, and most of this comes from the writings of Sri Vishnava Chakravarti Thakur and Jiva Goswami and Srila Prabhupada. So as practicing devotees, a question that we'll ask is, when will bhakti, which is all auspicious, appear? And this is answered, and I'll just read in English because I know their time is of essence, and also Sunday Feast is not meant to be a Sanskrit lecture. So in this chapter called, in Canto 10, chapter 51, there's deliverances of Muchukunda. So Muchukunda, that pastime is when Lord Krishna comes out, after taking care of his relatives, he comes out of Dwarka. And there's a demon by the name of Kalyavan. And there's a chase that occurs where Lord Krishna is apparently running from him, but eventually enters a cave, and in the cave is a sleeping man, and Lord Krishna disappears from the eyes of the demon. And the demon goes there and sees this man lying and thinks it's Lord Krishna and tries to attack him. And the demon has been blessed with a power. That individual, whose name is Muchukunda, has been empowered that he had a desire to go to sleep after fighting many, many battles. And the empowerment was that if somebody disturbs him from his sleep, then that person will automatically die. And Lord Krishna, being all-wise, allowed that to happen. And so the demon kicked Muchukunda, and Muchukunda woke up, and you can figure out the rest. The demon burnt up and all that. And so Muchukunda is a pure devotee. And so he spoke this verse to Lord Krishna. He said, when the material life of a wandering soul has ceased, O Achyuta, Achyuta is reference to Krishna, he may attain the association of your devotees. And when he associates with them, there awakens in him devotion unto you. Those who take shelter of your devotees. So the idea here is we are all enmeshed in material life, and when the jiva becomes free, when you read this verse, literally it's saying when the jiva becomes free of material life, then he gets association of devotees. But both Sri Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur and Jiva Goswami say it's actually the reverse. That it's opposite, that when a jiva achieves devotee association, at that point material life ends. That it's said in this way, in this particular verse, it's translated this way to just indicate a kind of a time sequence, that it occurs so fast that you can't tell which came first. So the acharyas go on to say that saintly association, sadhu association with sadhu, comes first, and material existence stops existing afterwards. It's kind of like the question, does one have love for Krishna first, or does one develop surrender to Krishna first? So the idea is one gets devotee association, and then one's material existence ceases. Because one is the cause and the other is the effect. The cause is devotee association, the effect is cessation of material life. But the acharyas explain, because this effect occurs so fast, it's oftentimes described in a reverse way, that when material life ends, then you get devotee association. But actually, it's everything Krishna does is initiated by his desire of his devotees. So mercy is also dependent on saintly devotees. And we're going to explore this one verse in the entire lecture. And an example of this is when we're going to be, doing Damodar pastime. We're going to be observing Damodar pastime when Krishna, liberated Nalakavera and Manigriv. So this kind of situation where material life, Mataji, there's a nursing room right next door, but he can also, we need privacy, there's a room right across that's greenish in color, and in there you have privacy where he can be, peaceful. So Krishna says to Nalakavera and Manigriv when he meets them, upon the activity of uprooting the twin trees. So he says, the great saint Narad Muni is very merciful. By his curse, he showed the greatest favor to both of you who are mad after material opulence, and who thus become blind. although you fell from the higher planet of Swargaloka, right, because they're the sons of Kubera, and became trees, you are most feared by him. I knew of all these incidents from the very beginning. So Krishna is telling them that I knew that this was going to happen, as Narad Muni seemingly cursed you to become the twin trees. And then there's an explanation on this. It comes from Canto 10, chapter 10, 41 verse, which is actually on the deliverance of the Arjun trees. When one is face to face with the sun, there's no longer darkness for one's eyes. Similarly, when one is face to face with a merciful devotee who is fully peaceful and surrendered to the Supreme Lord, one will no longer be subject to material bondage. So we know Nalakavera and Manigriva were misbehaving pretty badly. So they were definitely not free from material contamination. So the natural question is, how is it that Narad bestowed mercy on two such, kind of seemingly undeserving people? And the answer is that one is released from bondage, because we already talked about how a devotee association results, like sadhu association, results in freedom from material existence. So we're exploring how and why. So, and there's some very nectarian understandings that will come out, that you can kind of hold in your heart and remember when you think about devotees and sadhus in particular, and about Krishna Bhagwan. One is released from material bondage by seeing those whose minds are not disturbed by respect or disrespect, and those who have offered their minds completely to me. So Krishna is saying this about Naradji to Nalakavera and Manigriva. One's bondage, so the idea is one's bondage will continue until they have darshan of a devotee. And then Bhagavatam later on says, just like the sun destroys darkness just by rising, one's bondage is destroyed immediately upon seeing a pure devotee. But Bhagavatam gives a warning that this example exists of the sun destroying darkness, but it says, but the darkness won't be dissipated if the person is blind. And blindness here means making nama parad, Hare Krishna. That they won't be released even if they see Narad Muni. So that's why, the offenses to the holy name are very powerful. So continuing on, and this is the most common verses that are 3.52, 3.53 are the most common verses that are recited when devotees will talk about Srila Prabhupada's journey. And it's where Sri Vidur, because he leaves Hastinapur upon the insult of Duryodhan, and he goes on a pilgrimage. And he meets Maitreya Rishi. So Vidur says to Maitreya, he says, O great sage Maitreya, Maharishi, everyone in this world engages in fruitive activities to attain happiness, but one finds neither satiation, meaning satisfaction, or mitigation, meaning diminishing. We engage in activities to, get happiness, but we don't find in them true eternal happiness. On the contrary, one is only aggravated by such activities. Please, therefore, give us directions on how one should live for real happiness. So this is the very first question that Vidurji asked Maitreya Rishi. And so the acharyas explained that here's an important takeaway. I've tried to highlight in bold important things. All activities by human beings are generally motivated by desiring happiness. Whether it's work life, family life, personal motivations, or devotional activities as well. But the point that Vidurji is making is that such activities lead to more miseries because the happiness doesn't give human beings permanent satisfaction. We'll come back to this later in a very sweet way. The next verse, Vidurji says to Maitreya Rishi, "O my Lord, great philanthropic souls travel on earth on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to show compassion for the fallen souls who are averse." Averse means who don't desire subordination to the Lord. Do you see where I'm coming from? Srila Prabhupada and his journey through Jaladuta. So the first two lines tell us the nature of conditioned souls, like myself. We're vimukhasya krishnat. Mukha means face, vimukhasya, meaning turned our face away from Krishna. As a result, we're engaged in adharma. That's why it says adharma salasya. Irreligion, that which is not spiritual. And so we are sudukhatasya. So dukkha, we were talking about this in our Bhagavad Gita class when we were talking chapter 14. One of the qualities of modes of passion, Krishna describes as dukkha. And Sri Ramanuja Acharya says that dukkha is a compound word, part of which means happiness and the other part means distress. How much happiness, how much distress we get is based upon balance of our punya and our papa. So dukkha is not, so in mode of goodness one feels a little bit of happiness and a little bit of distress. A little bit of happiness, a little bit of distress. Why? Because it's papa and punya kind of coming along. Waves. So suddukha is always unhappy, not just a little bit, but always. And Krishna explains that in chapter 14 when he talks about tamasic mode. It's not that you have a little bit of happiness, a little bit of distress. It's continuous pramada, continuous distress. When one doesn't even know what to do to alleviate that distress. So because of being, so Chishanatay Sachanand Dev ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Guru Parampara ki jai. So because of, Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, because of ancient karmas, meaning not just this life but past lives, the jiva is, turned their vimukhasya Krishna. They turned their face against Krishna. So because of that, they have adharma salasya. When there's association, is what Vidur is saying, then without delay, person concentrates upon Bhagwan. Only at that time of association and not at other times does that occur. So the question becomes, why don't we always experience such an effect from the company of bhaktas or sadhus? Why do we see so often the faults of aversion towards Bhagwan that we have, what Prabhu called anarthas this morning? That they're not destroyed and love for Lord Krishna's lotus feet doesn't arise, despite associating with sadhus. Why? Bhagavatam saying that can destroy our material existence. Why is that not happening? So the answer, according to Sri Jiva Goswami and Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur and Srila Prabhupada, is that Lord actually does not appear to and this is subtle, Lord does not appear to non-devotees, but by association, the non-devotees can attain Bhagwan. So Sri Jiva Goswami says, by inference, if you see that there's no visible association and bhakti develops, then you can infer that somehow other devotee association occurred in a past life or indirectly in this life. My favorite example is of this, which I think most of you have heard, but I'll repeat it because I really like it. My favorite example is this. There was a pastime where Srila Prabhupada was traveling with a devotee in South America on an airplane. Sri Prabhupada Mataji, what is that name of that sweet devotee who served as Srila Prabhupada's servant, your good friend? The one who had a stroke in Hawaii. Okay, when you think of it, you can tell me. No. Sorry, not him. That's okay. So he was described as being in the flight with Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada oftentimes the devotees would offer puffed rice to Srila Prabhupada on flights. Easy to prepare, easy to digest, prasadam, no cooking required. And so a stewardess was walking by. Have you guys heard, who's heard this story? Yeah. So a stewardess was walking by, and she saw that Srila Prabhupada had a plate of puffed rice, and she was intrigued. And so she's Shrutakriti Prabhu. That was his servant during this flight. And she said, "What is that?" She asked Prabhu, "What is that?" And he said, "Puffed rice." So, she looked at it and she just grabbed it with her hands and started eating it and said, "Oh, it's very good," out of Srila Prabhupada's plate. And so then she went on to her business. The stewardesses are busy. And then she came back, and she had some feeling of gratitude, and she said to Shrutakriti Prabhu, that is there something that Srila Prabhupada would like? And he asked Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada said, hot milk. And so she said, okay. She went back and, heated up some milk and gave it to him, hot. And that was the end of that pastime. Srila Prabhupada, I think, was going from somewhere to Brazil, and then from there to somewhere else. And then decades passed by, and devotees are going around doing book distribution in South America. And they go to the biggest forest in the world, which is called the Amazon. And the Amazon is like remote. You can only get there by boat. And a lot of the tribes are very hostile. They don't want any foreigners to come, anybody from outside their culture to come in and cause disturbance. And so, as a result, they were, you encounter difficulty. I mean, we encountered difficulty in the West when we were distributing books, because people don't know the culture, or you distribute to Indian Bhardied people and they say, oh, we know Gita. And it's very funny for devotees to hear that, because the Sadhu Goswamis are going around saying, my dear Krishna, where are you? We don't know you. Where's Srimati Radharani? We don't know you. And people at the bookstore, at the grocery store are saying, we know Gita. So anyways, so the devotees were trying to do this, book distribute. And they went to this one house that was up on stilts, because it was up above the river. And they go in there, and they see that, they go into this house, and there's all these devotional posters and devotional books in the middle of Amazon. No devotees ever gone there before in the history of the world. And these tribes are isolated for thousands of years, because they're remnants from like the ancient, Indian civilization that was there before the Spaniards came. And she had like deities too and books. And they said, how? And she said, I was that stewardess that took the popcorn out of Srila Prabhupada's plate and took it. And that certainly created within me a desire to receive this, teachings. And even though I'm living in a very simple situation, I'm benefiting. So, by association, you know, the idea is the answer to that question of why do we have association of advanced devotees, Sadhu, Srila Prabhupada, but our aversion towards Lord Krishna doesn't go away. And so the answer is that Lord does not directly appear to non-devotees. But when it occurs, even though there's no association, you can assume that something happened either in past life or in the immediate previous life, like in the case of this Mataji. I don't know her name. So, however, there was no development of bhakti in Nalakuvara or the Devatas, though they saw Narad, because if someone has committed, so this is the answer to the question, if someone has committed an offense, they will not respect the devotee or the sadhu and will not see, and will see them with an ordinary vision. So to remove, this is coming back to Srila Prabhupada's journey, to remove that fault in the general population, the devotees through association must give mercy, thus causing the person who receives the mercy to be favorable in attitude towards Krishna Bhagwan. If a person has no offenses, then by association, that person will see devotees as very exalted. And even though he may not be very attentive to what they're saying, by association he can develop bhakti. But because we're seeing the sadhu as an ordinary person, Hare Krishna, you know, we're seeing their fault. So the sadhu has to then, you know, do something. Sadhu has to give mercy. So we're going to explore that concept next. So the answer continues, O Supreme Lord, O most praiseworthy, those whose inner minds are stolen far away by material senses do not see the devotees who have reached success by the wealth of remembering and glorifying your pastimes. Those whose minds are stolen away by the senses don't see the devotees, who have actually, those that have achieved the wealth of remembrance and glorification of the Lord. So it's basically because of the mind and the material senses. So if a person's only contaminated due to disinclination towards Krishna, but otherwise non-offensive, then simple association will be sufficient for them, because the sadhu will eliminate those faults from them. But if someone's not inclined toward Bhagwan and is offender, then he may not be able to get free from that offense or indifference to Bhagwan. So, but Shri Goswami says, but when they receive the merciful glance of the great soul, they will be free from that offense and become inclined. So I put this in bold and I underlined it. He says specifically that if the great soul bestows his grace on the offender without looking at the offenses, because it is simply his nature to be kind, then the offender can become inclined towards hearing. So the great sadhu, Srila Prabhupada, comes and he comments that everybody's filled with, you know, rajas and tamasic, wood of passion and ignorance. How will the message of Bhagavatam get to them? And it got to them not through Krishna, but because Srila Prabhupada did not see their offense of all the people that he met. And this is proven by Prahlad Maharaj and Lord Nrsingadev's conversation. So Prahlad Maharaj says to Lord Nrsingadev, O Lord, generally the sadhus desire their own liberation. They practice silence and live alone, not interested in others' welfare. I myself do not desire liberation all alone, rejecting the suffering people. I do not see any shelter other than you for those wandering blindly in this world. the mood of our acharyas. So Jiva Goswami and Sri Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur both explained the same thing, which is Prahlad is merciful to all people of the material world. So why didn't everybody become liberated throughout all of creation? Because they said, because there are unlimited number of jivas, all were not able to be liberated. But by Prahlad's mercy, all those whom he had seen or heard of, or whom he could think of, were liberated. So Prabhupada is making a journey to allow that to happen. Others, which Jiva Goswami adds a comment, he says, others were made successful by Nrsingadev's mercy through Prahlad, by chanting and remembering. But it was Prahlad's ability to remember those jivas and think of them that brought them the mercy of Nrsingadev. And Nrsingadev himself says this. He says, and the person who always remembers your activities, meaning Prahlad's activities, and my activities, M is capitalized, and who chants the prayers you have offered to please me, becomes free from bondage of karma in due course of time. So, meaning he who glorifies you, the sadhu, the pure devotee, what to speak of persons whom you remember with mercy, become free of material existence. So, Sri Jiva Goswami goes through all this to prove that first statement, that it's through devotee association that material existence gets removed. So the next question is, well, okay, that happens. How can one actually see Bhagwan? How can we get darshan of the Lord? So if one says that it's through the Lord's mercy, the Acharya said, no, that's not how. Creation. So that has to come from sadhu. And so Jiva Goswami says something very, very profound. This is spoken hundreds of years. He said, mercy is a change of heart. Mercy is a change of heart that occurs when one's heart is touched by another's suffering. Mercy is a change of heart that occurs when one's heart is touched by another's suffering. Everybody who does, Harinam, book distribution, this is a nice thing to remember. Now, he explores this more. What's the difference between the Lord's heart and a sadhu's heart is the immediate question. Because in scripture it said that the Lord is different from jiva. Since the Lord is always in highest bliss and he's untouched by material existence or material pop. And the analogy is made that darkness is not suitable for light because it's impossible for mercy to manifest, since it's impossible for the Lord's heart to be contaminated. And I'm going to show this from a very nice verse shortly. So the suffering of the materialist in this world is not experienced by the Lord. When people say, why is there so much suffering when there's Bhagwan? And Bhagwan's all compassionate, that's true. But that that suffering is not experienced by Bhagwan. So what remains, Jiva Goswami says, well, the only thing that remains is the mercy of the devotee in this material world. So there used to be a book about why do bad things happen to good people, right? It was written by a rabbi. How many of you have read through that book? Anybody? Or there's a book called Man's Search for Meaning, written by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a very famous psychologist who was Jewish. And Viktor Frankl's entire family, everyone, his mother, father, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, everybody was killed in the Holocaust in the concentration camp, everyone. And so he wrote, you can imagine the impact of that on one's life, right? That kind of intense suffering. And so he wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning. So the rabbi wrote similar thing because his child had an illness where his child was aging like anything. Like at the age of 10, he looked like a 75-year-old boy. So he literally was seeing his son wither in front of him. And the question was, if there's a benevolent, merciful God, why is this happening? So if God is benevolent, why does he not immediately relieve the people of suffering? Why did it take Srila Prabhupada to come to the West? The suffering of people suggests that God is cruel. Jiva Goswami says this himself. Or he's incapable of alleviating the suffering of others. And that's what this rabbi's conclusion was. The rabbi's conclusion is, God is good, but God is not all-powerful. He cannot eliminate this suffering. So Jiva Goswami explains this in Paramatma Sandarbha. And it's actually from Narad speaking to Narad sees Nal Kuvera and Manigriv at the very beginning. And Narad says, by seeing their faces, one whose body has been pricked by pins can understand the pain of others who have been also pricked by pins. Do you follow? Realizing that this pain is the same for everyone, he does not want others to suffer in this way. But one who has never been pricked by pins cannot understand this pain. I'll give you a worldly example. We hear people suffering with illnesses and dying all the time, right? When we hear of that happening to one of our relatives, does it affect us differently? Definitely. Because by relationship with me, I'm feeling their pain. But everybody else who has no relationship with me, I don't feel their pain. So that's what Shri Jiva Goswami, that's what Naraji is explaining. One whose body has been pricked by pins can understand the pain of others who are pin-pricked. Realizing that this pain is the same for everyone, he does not want others to suffer in this way. But one who has never been pricked by pins cannot understand this pain. Now, I was talking about why mercy cannot directly come from Bhagwan. It has to come from devotee. So, Jiva Goswami uses this to explain why. He says, if a person has had no experience of pain whatsoever, material misery, then that person simply is unable to understand the concept of material pain. If one has experienced suffering, then and only then can we empathize with the suffering of others. Only then will one feel compassion for others. I remember when I was in medical school, I was a third-year medical student, and I was assigned to cover patients who had diseases of their joints called rheumatology. And it wasn't a very, and some of you who've had those joint pains can probably appreciate the discomfort, right? But the powers that be felt I wasn't busy enough in that because there weren't too many patients with that. So they decided to, because I envisioned myself going into neurosurgery, that was my goal. But then the powers that be decided that I should go into the cancer ward where they have a lot of cancer patients. And I had heard that that's a very, very tough place. But my merciful preceptors gave me half a day off before having me go there, which was, I think, the last time I've had something like that. And so I went home and I turned on, there's a public broadcast system called PBS, so I turned on the TV. This was in the mid-1980s. And I watched a documentary on Mother Teresa. And she said something that was very profound. She said, the world is not in need of anything but love. And she was wearing this simple dhoti and speaking this to like the most senior professors at Harvard University. Looking very sophisticated, but she, just by saying that one word, she tamed them. And I heard that and I said, okay, I don't know anything. I don't have compassion, but I'll go there and I'll try to carry some compassion. So like that, if one has experienced suffering, then and only then, Jiva Goswami says, can one empathize with the suffering of others. And only then will one feel compassion for others. Those of you that have had parents that are ill or have passed away, or children that have issues, you can appreciate what I'm talking about. A pure devotee suffers through the suffering of others and therefore wants to take action to stop it. So Jiva Goswami then says, remember we were talking about Bhagwan at this point, like why is this not coming through Bhagwan? He says Bhagwan is full of spiritual bliss and he's free of all contamination. So Bhagwan doesn't make distinction between material suffering and so-called material happiness. Why? Because this is actually only, sorry for the typo, it's actually only a different type of suffering, material happiness. In this way, Jiva Goswami says, the Lord's eyes are like the owl's eyes. Owl? The owl doesn't distinguish between light and darkness. Likewise, Lord doesn't distinguish between material happiness and material suffering. So even though the Lord is aware of all suffering, right? He says that in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1, Verse 1. The Lord says, I have awareness of my material creation. I'm fully aware of everything in the material creation. So Jiva Goswami says he's aware of the suffering, yet he personally never feels that suffering. Because that's not his nature. He does not, but Jiva Goswami says, he does not require to suffer personally in order to feel compassion for others. Whereas we have to suffer personally in order to feel compassion for others. That's why a lot of people come into Krishna consciousness because they've felt suffering out in the outer world. But then once we're in Krishna consciousness, it's like the Tulsi Maharani's leaves, You get two leaves that spring out, auspiciousness and kleshagani, decrease in suffering. And so we get very comfortable. Yeah, things are good. I don't need to do anything. So he says, Jiva Goswami says, unlike us, Lord does not need to suffer to feel compassion for others. So he's not like conditioned souls who require to suffer before they can feel compassion for others. So why is a sadhu seemingly more merciful than Bhagwan, according to the acharyas? Because Jiva Goswami and Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur both say this. Though the devotees are also not affected by suffering of the world, they sometimes remember it. They sometimes remember that suffering. Like when one remembers suffering in dreams after awaking, right? Like, oh, somebody was chasing me. Like I remember in, I think like, 2005, 2006, I had a dream that somebody really terrible was chasing me and then Nrsimhadev Bhagwan was there. So sometimes we remember something of suffering. Sadhu, of course, Anandam Bhudi Vardhanam. But sometimes they remember it. Thus, they show mercy to people of this world. In this way, Narad Muni, because Narad Muni remembered his suffering before he, apparently became a devotee. And Narad Muni remembered that in my past life, I had association of the Bhaktivedantas. And they relieved my suffering. They showed me mercy. So in this way, Narad Muni, remembering that suffering that he himself had gone through, according to Chief Goswami, showed that mercy to Nalakavara and Manigriva. So it's not because sufferings, it's not because of experiencing the sufferings of this world that the Lord shows mercy. He shows mercy because of bhakti that's filled with humility in a human being, in a jiva. When we have that, Trinadapi Sunechana, that's when Lord's mercy directly manifests. But he presents himself, his merciful form, in the form of a devotee. So, Lord's mercy does not operate independently or on its own. And that's why there's this, famous statement that the merciful devotees easily crossing insurmountable and terrifying ocean of material life attain their goal using the boat, Shishintai Sachinan Dev Ki Jai, using the boat of your lotus feet, which is bhakti. You show your mercy through your devotees. So how can bhakti be dependent on devotees? That verse talks about it. It says, Sad Anugraha Bhavan. How are devotees able to cross the ocean of birth and death? Because you, Shri Krishna, are merciful to the devotees and not to others. You give mercy to the others through the devotees, Sad Anugraha. Or your mercy, Jiva Goswami said, is the devotees. Your mercy operates in this material world through the devotees, not in any other way. So what is the stimulus for devotees, for a sadhu? I'm speaking about a pure devotee, a sadhu's mercy. So the stimulus is just from seeing a miserable situation. Srila Prabhupada commented on that in his Mark in Bhagavad Gita, that these people are suffering so much, how can I deliver to them the message of Godhead? Right? He says that directly. So by seeing the miserable situation, Srila Prabhupada is seeing this, and he's overlooking, the sadhu is overlooking the offense, because he's not depending on that person worshipping him. He's just overlooking that offense. And this was the case with Narad Muni and Nalakavara and Manigriva, right? They were committing an offense, sadhu ninda. So Narad Muni says, he actually says this to Vasudeva, the father of Lord Krishna. He says, those who worship the demigods receive some reciprocation from the devatas, just like a correspondence to the offering, like Krishna Bhagwan says in Gita. The demigods are attendants of karma, meaning they're universal administrators who dole out, karmic reaction. But the sadhus are actually merciful to the fallen. So he's saying that devotees of the Lord, such as Narad Muni, can interfere actually in the karma of a living being by persuading them to give up material activities and fruitive activities and mental speculation. And then there's another verse that explains that more. So Srila Prabhupada's vision that he implemented is described very succinctly in Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instructions on pure devotional service in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Mahat kripa van kaun karme bhakti noy, Krishna prapti dure rohi, samsara nahi kosha. Unless one is favored by a pure devotee, one cannot attain the platform of devotional service. To say nothing of Krishna bhakti, one cannot even be relieved from the bondage of material existence. There is no other way to free the contaminated heart from subtle desires. It's used from anadi, beginningless time, and to become favorable to the Lord's feet except by associating with sadhu. Because the sadhu will overlook our contaminations and our offenses, because the sadhu will feel our pain, because he has a distant remembrance of what that was like. And because the sadhu is feeling that pain that we're suffering through, we may not realize it, but the sadhu is realizing it. The sadhu is directly implanting Shraddha into our heart as a result. I'll end with this. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote in his journal, Sahajana Toshani, Sriman Mahaprabhu did not descend with his associates to deliver a certain number of human beings in the land of India, but rather his purpose was to deliver and uplift all living beings in all countries of the world by practicing the eternal religion of all the souls, Sanatana Dharma. And you can see this in Srila Prabhupada's writings. Srila Prabhupada, in his prayers to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, which was written while Jaladuta was in the midst of the Atlantic Ocean, all the kids can go to their respective parents. Yes. That's like the jiva trying to find Krishna. Where is he? Srila Prabhupada wrote, although my Guru Maharaj ordered me to accomplish this mission, I'm not worthy or fit to do it. I'm very fallen and insignificant. Therefore, O Lord, now I'm begging for your mercy, so that I may become worthy, for you are the wisest and most experienced of all. If I receive that divine empowerment from you, then by serving my spiritual master, I will attain the strength to render this service, and the purpose of my existence will be fulfilled. So, you can see Srila Prabhupada engaging so many devotees regardless of race, color, ethnicity, background, and just doing what Sadhu does, connecting them back to Lord Krishna's mercy in the form of holy name. So that's why I titled this Srila Prabhupada, Mercy Incarnate. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Namom Vishnupadaya, Krishna Pasthaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhaktivedanta, Swami Ita Namane, Namaste Saraswate Devi, Gauravani Pacharane, Nirvashesha Shunyavadi, Pashataya Deshatare. Jai Patita Pavan Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhaktavinda, Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhaktavinda, Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you very much. We'll do, I guess I don't see Mataji here, so if somebody wants to ask a question, I don't know whether I have qualification to answer it. Oh, she's there. Is that what you're pointing to? Ah. Okay. Any corrections? I guess that's probably more important. Additions? Realizations? Are people awake? Haribo? Okay. Hare Krishna. So please try to absorb, as you can, the mercy of a sadhu. Many of us have spiritual masters, so we can try to understand that too. Okay? Thank you, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
हरे कृष्णा हरि बोल। जय निताय सचिनंदन भगवान की जय। हरे कृष्णा। Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hari Bol, Hare Krishna, Hari Bol. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Gaur Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Ram Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Ram Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna. Gauranga, 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 Gauranga. Nityananda, 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 Nityananda. Gauranga, 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 Gauranga. Gauranga, 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 Gauranga. Jayo Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jayo Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari. Nitai, Nitai, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari. Nitai, Nitai, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol. जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिवार का जष्टर श्रीमत अभय चरणारविंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद जी महाराज की नित्य पुरुष जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिवार का जष्टर श्रीमत भक्ति सिद्धेश्वर ठाकुर गोस्वामी प्रभुपाद महाराज की जय। श्रील गौर किशोरदास बाबा जी महाराज की जय। श्रील सज्जन भक्तनाथ ठाकुर की जय। षड गोस्वामी प्रभुगण की जय। प्रेम से कहो जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। गंगा माई जमुना माई की जय। भक्ति देवी तुलसी महारानी की जय। श्री श्री निताय सच्चिनंदन भगवान की जय। श्री श्री कृष्ण बलराम भगवान की जय। श्री श्री नृसिंह भगवान प्रहलाद महाराज की जय। श्री श्री जगन्नाथ बलभद्र सुभद्रा महारानी चक्र संजीव की जय। श्री श्री राधा श्याम सुंदर भगवान की जय। नद्या नवदीप मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री श्री राधा माधव वृंद की जय। पंच तत्व की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव भक्त वृंद की जय। भवन मंडल भवन पावन हरे कृष्ण महामंत्र की जय। नाम श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। समवेत गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। इस्कन पटलैंड समस्त गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। निताय गौर सीतनाथ प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। ऑल गौरीश देशुल्य हरे कृष्ण। ऑल गौरीश देशुल्य हरे कृष्ण। ऑल गौरीश ऑल गौरीश गुरु गौरांग प्रभुपाद की।
Vidisha, didn't you want to do nursing of their prayer? Sorry. You can take off your mask.
Okay. Namaste Narasimhaya. Tava Karakamala